I'm Chance Dorland, and this is In-Depth, an interview program from expressnews.com where you can find in-depth reporting and other resources concerning every topic you'll hear discussed on this podcast. Brought to you today by North Park Mazda, the #1 Mazda dealer in Texas last month. Today is a 2-for-1. I'm joined first by San Antonio Express News politics reporter Jasper Scherer, and later I'll be joined by Peggy Fikac to discuss the area's upcoming primary elections. But first, as I mentioned, I'm speaking with Jasper Scherer. Jasper, great to have you on the program for the first time.
Afternoon, Chance. Thanks for having me.
You bet. So let's do the top-down approach. We're going to talk first about Congress, move into the State House, and then finish with the DA's race and perhaps another more local one. So start things off in the Congress. We're, of course, talking about Lamar Smith's November retirement announcement. It set off kind of a frenzy. I believe now 18 GOP candidates are seeking to take over his open seat, correct?
That's right. So there are 18 Republicans running for Lamar Smith's seat in Congressional District 21, which covers parts of San Antonio, Austin, and the Hill Country. And that's right. You know, when Smith announced he planned to retire after 3 decades in the House, he brought a bunch of these folks out of the woodwork who ordinarily wouldn't have run against Smith. He established himself as a pretty formidable foe for anyone who decided to challenge him over those 3 decades. And so with 18 candidates, the primary is really just about as unpredictable as they come. Because if you think about it, only about 70,000 people voted in the last midterm Republican primary in that district. So with 18 candidates, you're potentially looking at a difference of, you know, maybe a couple thousand votes or less between the second or third place finisher. And that's going to determine who makes it into what's seen as pretty much an all but inevitable runoff because you have to get more than 50% of the vote to win outright. So some of the names that are often floated as frontrunners include Jason Isaac, who's the only sitting member of the legislature. He's using this Trump-esque slogan that he's kind of referring to it as a mission statement to make America like Texas. And that's a kind of reference to his aim to bring a small government Texas-like approach to Congress. There's also Chip Roy, who's Ted Cruz's first chief of staff when he was elected to the Senate back in 2012. Chip Roy is also a former senior staffer to a whole bunch of big Texas Republican elected officials, and he's really established himself as one of the more conservative folks among the 18. And William Negley, former CIA officer who's been among the more prolific fundraisers in the race. He's got the backing of Red McCombs, a wealthy billionaire from the San Antonio area. So I think what's particularly notable here is that Cruz has become so involved on Roy's behalf. He's rallied in the district for Roy and drummed up a bunch of financial support for him and just been generally active at part of sometimes in the campaign. So, and lastly, for this primary, you know, the issue of carpetbagging has really come into play sort of predictably when you have 18 candidates. You know, a good chunk of them are coming from outside the district. You do not have to legally live inside the district you're running for Congress. And some of the people who are from inside the district originally have kind of made that a point of contention. So we'll know after March 6th how much voters care about the issue of residency. And then on the other side of the aisle, the Democrats are keeping a close eye on how that race shakes out, because with Smith's retirement, they're at least in the conversation for the seat, which hasn't been the case for quite some time. And of particular note is that the nonpartisan Cook Political Report recently moved that district from their solidly Republican candidate to likely Republican camp, which sort of an indication that it might be in play, although some Republican consultants might disagree with that point. But the main debate unfurling in that primary is centered on whether Democrats have a better chance if they run a more progressive candidate who, during a potential blue wave year, could draw votes from Democrats who typically sit out midterm elections. Or on the other hand, some people see a better strategy as running a more moderate Democrat who can scoop up Republicans who are fed up with Donald Trump. And that strategy seems to be a more effective one if one of the sort of Freedom Caucus type candidates win in the Republican primary for this race. And so the specific names, we've got Joseph Kopser, who's far outraised his opponents, Derek Crow, Elliot McFadden, and Mary Wilson. Although the other three have been forcing Kopser to spend a lot of his money. They've been coming after him for being, as they say, a Republican light candidate. They've pointed out he sits on the Texas Association of Business, which is a conservative business lobby, and that he supports fracking. And Kopser's camp, aside from chalking all that up to kind of typical primary campaign rhetoric, they say Kopser presents a much-needed voice, on a progressive voice that is on the board of the Texas Association of Business. And they also say he wants to reach 100% renewable energy ultimately, but he sees fracking as a more reasonable bridge to get there from where we're at right now. And then moving over to the 23rd Congressional District, this one's interesting because it's really seen as one of the most competitive districts in the state, if not in the country. So first of all, Will Hurd, who's the incumbent Republican in that seat, he's not only seen as a shoo-in to win his primary, but he's got a huge head start on whoever makes it out of the Democratic primary. He's got $1.2 million in the bank, which, we talk about money a lot in politics as reporters, but in this race, it's for good reason. It's a huge district. And, I think Gina Ortiz-Jones, one of the Democratic candidates, said it best when I asked her about the money aspect. She pointed out there are several major media markets here, including San Antonio and the El Paso metro area. And she said, essentially, I wish I could knock on 700,000 doors, but that's just not the reality. So she's got about double the amount of cash on hand that Jay Hewlings, another Democrat running, has in the bank himself. So just by virtue of fundraising, Jones and Hewlings are kind of seen as the top contenders. But Rick Trevino, he was a 2016 Bernie Sanders delegate who's essentially adopted Bernie's platform. He's acted as somewhat of a grenade in that race just by, he's directly confronted Hewlings and Jones for taking PAC money and for not sufficiently embracing progressive positions in his mind. And we've also got Judy Canales, another candidate who's sort of carved out a specialty in rural development and agriculture. She was a Bill Clinton and Barack Obama appointee to the agriculture department. So she's emphasized that and her roots in the district is kind of a big selling point. And kind of the last thing I would touch on here is that one of the factors that's been drawing a lot of attention in this primary is who can actually beat Will Hurd in November and what the best strategy for doing that is. And so a recent poll by a group called Public Policy Polling showed that voters in the district see Hurd much more favorably than Trump by about actually a 25% margin. Hurd's favorable, unfavorable rating is at 46-31 right now, while more than half the voters in the district see Trump unfavorably. And so given that, Hewlings has focused, he appears to have focused at least a lot more of his energy on Trump, both in his television advertising and at debates and forums that I've been at. And he's also said, he's in the best position to match Hurd point for point on areas like security and intelligence as a former federal prosecutor. Although I think Jones would likely argue she's served for that just as well as she's a former intelligence officer in the Air Force.
Sure. So obviously very complicated, not only just with the numbers, but as you just described, all the different ins and outs of all the different people that are involved. And then, of course, I love the point that you just made with Will Hurd. It's all great to have someone that you believe in, whether or not that's progressive or more middle of the road for a Democrat, but you have to win the person that you're eventually going to face in the general election. That's something you have to keep in mind. Moving along now to the State House, Jasper. This is interesting because the governor is involved with the State House race that we're going to talk about first.
Yeah, that's a really fascinating angle in a race that really wasn't expected to draw a whole lot of attention. And we're talking about District 122, which Republican Lyle Larson currently represents, and the governor, Greg Abbott, has really set his sights on removing Larson from office by endorsing and funding Larson's challenger, Chris Fales. And I think it's also notable that several PACs have kind of followed suit, jumping off of Abbott's recent endorsement. They put a bunch of money into Fales's campaign over the last month or so, whereas he hadn't been drawing quite as much attention from sort of those major groups before the governor got involved. And the background here is that Abbott has begun calling Larson, quote unquote, liberal Lyle, sort of in the mold of a Donald Trump type insult, for not taking adequately conservative stances, right? So Larson has kind of shot back, saying that his voting record tells a different story. And specifically, the issues at play here are Senate Bill 4, so-called sanctuary cities ban, and then property tax reform, both of which Abbott is saying that Larson voted to diminish. And again, I should point out, Larson ultimately supported the final form of both pieces of those legislation last year, but there's just a whole lot of distinction here, a whole lot of nuance, I should say, in that Larson voted against a particular SB 4 amendment that ultimately made it into the final version that Larson himself supported. And Larson also voted to end debate on a version of Abbott's preferred version of property tax reform. So really, we're making some pretty, like I said, fine distinctions here. And Larson, as such, is claiming that Abbott's main point is more just to punch back for an ethics reform bill that he proposed last year. Here I'll quote from a statement that Larson put out. He said, "The governor's mad that I passed ethics reform to stop," in all caps, "all governors from appointing their largest political donors to powerful positions. So he used their donations to buy $96,582 worth of untrue ads against me." And again, should note that Larson did not actually pass the bill into law, and that would actually be Abbott who would have to sign it into law himself. But he did get it through the House before it failed in the Senate. So that's sort of the backdrop to that feud.
Obviously a very interesting tale when we're talking about the state house primary and we're talking about the governor as well. So more to tell there. Moving along now, Jasper, to District 116, which is also interesting in its own way.
Yeah, so District 116 includes San Antonio's west and northwest sides, and it sets up a race between Diana Arevalo, who's a first-term incumbent, against Trey Martinez-Fisher, who's running for a seat that he held for 17 years, and he gave it up to run for state senate unsuccessfully. And the major point that Trey's making here, his major pitch to voters, I think, is that his knowledge of the House's rules and procedures make him best suited to sort of inhibit the Republicans' agenda in 2019 after they elect what's almost certainly going to be a more conservative speaker than Joe Straus, who has announced he's retiring. And I should also point out that as of Saturday, Trey had about 7 times as much cash on hand as Arevalo, and also delving into the endorsement game, he's got support of Joaquin Castro, a congressman in the San Antonio area, and a whole host of Texas House Democrats also endorsed Trey earlier this year, including Roland Gutierrez, Ina Minjarez, and Justin Rodriguez. Jose Menendez, a state senator who Trey unsuccessfully challenged, is backing Arevalo, along with State Rep Barbara Gervin-Hawkins and former state senator Leticia Van de Putte.
And of course, speaking of Joe Straus, District 121, right?
Yeah, so there are 6 Republicans running to replace Straus, including one of his former primary opponents, Matt Beebe. And so this race, in a way, acts as sort of a microcosm of the war that Straus found himself in at the center of last year, primarily revolving around the so-called bathroom bill, with Beebe has primarily run his campaign on his strong support for issues supported by groups like Texas Right to Life and Empower Texans, both of whom have endorsed Beebe. And on the other hand, Steve Allison and Mark White are 2 candidates who fall more into the Straus mold. They tend to stick to issues like property tax reform and school finance. And they've really stayed away. They actually said they would oppose the bathroom bill. So that's kind of the 2 opposing camps that you've got here. And then there's also Carlton Soules, who was once kind of the token Republican on city council. He's running, and he's talked up his experience, his pretty extensive experience in government, and somewhat similar to Allison and White, seems to have a desire to focus more on fiscal issues, which is where he can claim some expertise, although he does also support, he's come out in support of a ban on sanctuary cities.
And of course, Jasper, there are other races that are going on, but for the sake of time, let's finish now on the district attorney's race.
Yeah, this one's fascinating. It's made a lot of noise here in Bexar County and really had some reverberations around the state as well with it's caught the attention of Greg Abbott. So some background. In November, a San Antonio defense attorney named Joe Gonzalez jumped into the Democratic primary race against the incumbent district attorney, Nico LaHood, who's finishing up his first term in office. And so the major news item here is that the campaign finance reports that were made available Tuesday revealed that George Soros, a liberal billionaire financier, donated about $900,000 to Gonzalez over the last month or so, which is a huge sum for a local district attorney race. And, LaHood has accused Gonzalez of trying to buy the office through Soros's cash injection. And, Gonzalez has, I think it's worth noting, he's taken exception to one of LaHood's claims that we reported yesterday, an accusation that Gonzalez is, to quote, essentially laundering money from Soros. And so this was really already a pretty heated race before this whole Soros business, with LaHood's primary point of attack to kind of challenge Gonzalez's track record as a defense attorney for, as he said, specializing in defending clients accused of various forms of child abuse. And I should note that LaHood himself is a former defense attorney who also has defended those same cases, although not quite to the degree that Gonzalez has. And of course, Gonzalez has shot back saying, anyone accused of a crime deserves to be defended. He's really said it almost reflects a misunderstanding of the justice system on LaHood's part to attack him of defending certain crimes. And LaHood has also repeatedly claimed that Gonzalez is only capable of offering criticisms and not substantive solutions to the DA's office. I've heard him say that multiple times at various debates and in interviews. And also to LaHood, there's really nothing wrong with the way the office is operating right now. I think he realizes there are some areas where he can improve. But what's really interesting in this race is that Gonzalez has attacked LaHood for taking these conservative stances. And remember, this is a Democratic primary. And Gonzalez is saying that LaHood has stated opposition to the concept of sanctuary cities and actually said outright on a radio show that he's a conservative guy. And LaHood also made a lot of noise his first term by saying that vaccines can and do cause autism. And Gonzalez has essentially said the DA shouldn't be using his public platform to weigh in on that issue. I should also note that Greg Abbott, a Republican, has used the Soros contributions as a rallying point, both at recent campaign stops and in emails that he sends out to his supporters. So this whole tone of whether LaHood is actually more conservative, as Gonzalez has pointed out, has been a central theme in this campaign. And the irony of all that is that the district attorney isn't a particularly partisan position. I mean, he, as the chief prosecutor in the county, the DA doesn't pass bills. That's more of a notable issue in terms of how they might respond to issues related to sanctuary cities, for instance. And last thing to point out is that there's another defense attorney and former Bexar County DA's office prosecutor, Tilden Schaefer, who's running as a Republican. So he will face whoever wins on Tuesday.
Excellent. So, of course, this primary coming up on March 6th. We've gone through some races in the Congress, the State House, also just locally talking about the DA. So I've been, of course, speaking with San Antonio Express News politics writer Jasper Scherer. Thanks for joining me for the first time, Jasper, and hopefully we'll check with you perhaps down the road after, because once again, this is just the primary. There's more to be had in all of these stories that we just discussed.
Oh, definitely. Stay tuned. And there will be some runoffs coming up as well after March 6th. So I'm sure we'll be talking soon.
Once again, speaking with another San Antonio Express News politics reporter, this time from a different location. I'm speaking now with Peggy Fikac to discuss some more statewide elections and perhaps a little bit of theory on Republican versus Democrat in this upcoming primary election. So, Peggy, great to have you on the podcast for the first time.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
And so a little bit about yourself. Where are you calling me from?
From Austin, Texas, the capital, of course, where I cover politics and government.
Excellent. So a different perspective, obviously, than Jasper, who we just spoke with, who's, of course, based in San Antonio. So we're talking now about the governor's race, correct? And this is a little bit more complicated because of some things that I already spoke with Jasper about previously.
Yes. On the Republican side, of course, there's not much of a contest. You've got Governor Greg Abbott. He's got more than $40 million in the bank. He is not expected to have any trouble winning the Republican nomination. And in fact, he is already in the primary election and well before the primary election trying to raise the groundwork for the general election. He wants to drive the score up. He wants to get a lot of support from Hispanic voters, come up with a big total so that strengthens his position going into the next legislative session and puts him even more on the national map. On the Democratic side, we've got a 9-way race for the nomination. The two candidates who have gotten the most attention are former Dallas County Sheriff Lupe Valdez and Houston businessman Andrew White. White is the son of the late Democratic former Governor Mark White. So some of the longtime Democrats have some affection for him. Because of that, the family is very well respected. And Andrew White said that he jumped into the race because he doesn't like the direction of the state under Abbott and the issues that Abbott chooses to emphasize, such as the bathroom bill. Valdez is from San Antonio. She is the daughter of migrant workers, got into law enforcement and ended up being the first woman, the first Hispanic, and the first lesbian elected Dallas County Sheriff. And two very different candidates with two very different messages to offer Texans. White has very developed policy positions, and he has said he wants to appeal to Republicans, that he's best suited to challenge Abbott in November because he can draw broad support and appeal to moderates who, like himself, want to focus on issues like education. Valdez also emphasizes education, but she is seen as sort of a voter magnet by some of the party heavyweights. She has a Hispanic surname at a time when the Latino population is growing and ever more important at the polls. And she could potentially be a good messenger for a progressive message.
And so, as I mentioned, it's a little complicated in the fact that the incumbent Republican Governor Greg Abbott doing very well, as you just mentioned. He's not really afraid right now, but he has been reaching, if you will, into some of these other elections, which is what I just spoke with Jasper Scherer about. Perhaps could you comment on that?
Yes, absolutely. The governor last year, when he called the special legislative session, said that he was going to be keeping basically a naughty and nice list of lawmakers who went along with his agenda and supported him and those who did not. And we waited rather a long time for him to publicize his list of naughty and nice. And he's endorsing a fair number of lawmakers, and he found 3 to make his naughty list, 2 in the Houston area and 1 in the San Antonio area, Lyle Larson. What the 3 of them have in common is they either authored, as Larson did, or supported changes in the governor's appointment power. They wanted to curb his ability to appoint large donors to important state boards and commissions. We've done an analysis of donors, and Abbott has appointed nearly a third, I guess 29% of his appointees are people who donated to him, either big or small donations. And they've together, since he first left the Supreme Court to run for Attorney General, it sort of jump-started his political career and led him to becoming governor. They have given his campaign a combined $14.2 million. Now, he's not the only governor to have appointed donors. It's a longstanding practice. And Lyle Larson, in filing his bill to limit the appointment of donors, said he wasn't targeting Abbott specifically. He simply wanted to do away with a practice that has been used by many governors, and that a number of people think doesn't pass the smell test. The governors, of course, say that they appoint their supporters to positions, and their supporters sometimes give them money, sometimes a lot of money. And governors certainly resist having any of their power taken away. So it's natural that Abbott would resist this. By going the extra step, though, of targeting these particular lawmakers, who certainly weren't the only ones who voted for this legislation, but who talked about it in a way I guess he didn't like. By going after them, he's sort of putting his political reputation on the line and his ability to deal with the next legislature on the line as well. If he puts all the power of the governor's office behind the challengers to these three lawmakers and he doesn't prevail, that certainly does not make him look strong. And going into the next legislative session, governors are one of their biggest powers in dealing with lawmakers is not necessarily threats, although there's also always the threat of vetoing legislation. Now Abbott has added the threat of he'll try to oust people from office if they don't agree with him or if they offend him. But the threat only gets you so far. Some of the best governors have used the powers of persuasion, sort of a charm offensive, to convince lawmakers to pass legislation that they like. I think by doing this, Governor Abbott has sort of made it difficult to approach House members and even senators in a sort of using a sort of charm offensive when he's shown he's willing to basically kill them politically if they don't go along with him.
Yeah, usually you think about your opponents from another party, or maybe even just some primary opponent that you don't agree with from your own party, being the people who are going to prevent you from either keeping your office or obtaining the office that you're going for, right, in the election. But the sitting governor of your own party, that's a new one. That's a very interesting situation. So we'll have more on that. Yeah. Moving along now, let's continue talking about Republicans. There are some other hot primary races that are statewide that you can talk a little bit about, correct?
Yes, there are. Two of the most, hottest races. Two of the hottest races are the ones for land commissioner and for agriculture commissioner. Not at the top of the ballot, but very interesting in the way that the campaigns have been conducted, and also in what they affect. In the land commissioner race, the Alamo has become the flashpoint. The incumbent, George P. Bush of the establishment Bush family, has made a cornerstone of his administration reimagining the Alamo, repairing the shrine, and then also redeveloping the land around it in a way that he says will give a better sense of the battlefield and also, sort of take away the carnival-like atmosphere that's sort of natural to a downtown site with, Ripley's Believe It or Not and snow cones being sold and that type of thing. He has several competitors, but his main one is one of his predecessors as land commissioner and also a former state senator, Jerry Patterson, who also agrees that the shrine needs to be repaired. Does not like, along with some of the other activists in the Republican Party, the approach that Bush has taken. Patterson contends that Bush has not gotten enough input from people around the state. Also, there have been flashpoints along the way when various proposals have been made. There was a proposal to have glass walls delineating the battlefield. That drew an uproar. It's been tabled. There is a proposal to move the cenotaph, a monument to the heroes of the Alamo, and that has caused a firestorm that doesn't look likely to die down. And there's also a question about the structure that Commissioner Bush put in place to oversee the redevelopment of the Alamo. There's 3 separate nonprofits initially were created. It was sort of seen as not being very open. There was information that people could not get. Bush has made some changes to that now, but the overall impression has been one of him doing things perhaps secretly, perhaps that, people are questioning what the Alamo is going to look like when he's done.
Also a race that you don't think about a lot because it's kind of down ballot, agriculture commissioner. That one is, grabbing people's attention.
Oh, it absolutely is. And as you know, Agriculture Commissioner Sid Miller has been grabbing people's attention for a while. He has a propensity to get into, stir a little bit of controversy by some of the things he has done. He used state money to travel to another state to, he participated in a rodeo apparently while he was there, and he also got a Jesus shot, which is something that was, supposed to address some pain that he has in his hip and his leg. He later repaid the money for the trip, but it still became a big deal, in large part because you can't go get a Jesus shot without people, talking about it. It's just one of the many things he's done. He also referred to Hillary Clinton on Twitter with a crude 4-letter word, which he apologized for and blamed on a staff member. And he raised some fees on people who are regulated by his agency, which caused an uproar among them. He said he needed to do it to keep his agency going. His main challenger in the Republican primary is Trey Blocker. He's a former lobbyist, which Miller makes some hay of, and you would think he would go the strictly sensible route, which he has in some ways, saying that he would lower the fees and make sure that people are not being overcharged. But he also put out an online video in which he touted his endorsement from the hog hunters of Texas. And in talking about it, he was in a sort of meat locker in which dead feral hogs were hanging. And he punctuated his point by grabbing a knife and stabbing one of the already dead hogs in the side. And so it made one think, he's not necessarily going to be that much more of a calm office holder than Miller has proven to be.
Yeah, that's an ad. Okay, wow, there we are.
Only online.
That's a strong statement. So those were some Republican races across the state that are grabbing people's attention for obvious reasons. Let's now turn to the Democrats before we say goodbye, Peggy. What are the Democrats thinking? And I know that Trump is having some positive and negative effects for the Democrats.
Yeah, there are positive and negative effects for Democrats. On the negative side, they just don't like Trump or what he has done on a number of key issues. On the positive side, it's getting people out to vote. The early vote has been very strong for Democrats. They are outpacing Republicans so far, according to figures posted by the Secretary of State's office, which is unusual. They are up quite a bit from 2014. Republicans are up a little bit from the last governor's race, but certainly not anywhere near as much as Democrats in this primary election. Now, on the so the positive thing is that it's getting a lot of Democrats out. You've got a Democrat at the top of the ticket, Beto O'Rourke, who is certain to get the nomination to face U.S. Senator Ted Cruz, who is a charismatic figure. He's raised millions of dollars. He's drawing crowds all over the state. So that's a strong point for the Democrats. Below that, you have some candidates who are strong. Virtually all of them, no one has really heard of, possibly even or even the candidates running for governor, although they've received the most attention. Just below Beto O'Rourke, nobody really has a lot of money to get their message out there at this point. And so how much they'll be able to capitalize on the energy of Trump will depend on whether people simply want to vote for a Democrat at this time. Now, this is Texas, and so Republicans also see Trump as a factor, but as a positive factor. A recent poll showed that Republican primary voters have a good view. They overwhelmingly approve of the job that Trump is doing. Trump endorsed a number of top Republican officials who are running for re-election, and when he didn't include some of them, including Miller and Bush, in his initial round of endorsements, there was a lot of scurrying around and mild heart attacks, and he put out a second tweet saying that, oh, yes, he endorsed Miller and Bush as well, along with a couple of others. And so Republican state office holders clearly see him as a benefit, certainly in the primary. And, depending on who goes out to vote, if you have a lot of Republicans going to vote in November, if they have a good impression of Trump, that could be a benefit for the incumbents as well. So, overall, even though there is this enthusiasm on the Democratic side, it would be a lot for them to break through and win a statewide office at this point. They haven't won one in haven't been elected to one in nearly a quarter of a century. If they get as close as single digits in a statewide race, I think they'll count that as a win. Then the lower ballot, the races lower on the ballot, like Congress and legislative races, will be the ones which they will showcase as having achieved some victories.
I've been speaking with San Antonio Express News Austin correspondent, Austin politics writer, Peggy Fikac. Peggy, it's been great speaking with you. Some very nicely put insight. And these upcoming primary races and then, of course, general election races are very interesting for all the reasons that you've just pointed out. So I hope to speak with you again sometime down the road, perhaps after the primary.
That would be great. I'd love it. Thanks so much.
And, of course, a big thank you to both of my guests today, a double header as I spoke with San Antonio Express News politics writers Jasper Scherer and, of course, my final guest, Peggy Fikac, to discuss the upcoming March 6th primary elections and then moving along into the general elections as well here on the In-Depth podcast, brought to you today by North Park Mazda, the #1 Mazda dealer in Texas last month. For the San Antonio Express News, I'm Chance Dorland.